There comes a moment, usually after 50, when life begins to feel different. Not worse, not broken, but quieter. You stop looking ahead the same way. You start looking back more often. You measure time differently. And without even realizing it, a question begins to surface. Is this all there is? You've lived long enough to understand how things really work. You've seen effort go unnoticed, plans fall apart, opportunities disappear at the wrong time, and slowly, something begins to change. Not on the outside, but within. Your expectations begin to lower. It doesn't feel like giving up. It feels like being realistic. You tell yourself you're just adjusting, just accepting things as they are. But deep down, there's another truth you haven't fully faced yet. This isn't about age, it's about belief. Because the moment you begin to think your best years are behind you, your actions start to follow that thought. You stop reaching as far. You stop expecting as much. You begin to settle not because you have to, but because it feels safer. And that is how a life slowly becomes smaller. Not through one decision, but through many quiet adjustments, each one reasonable, each one justified. Until one day, without noticing, you are no longer building, you are maintaining. But what if that is not the truth? What if this stage of your life is not the end, but the point where everything finally becomes usable? Because think about it. You are not starting from nothing. You are starting from understanding. You have already seen what does not work. You have already paid the cost of mistakes. You have already experienced what most people are still trying to figure out. And that gives you something incredibly valuable: clarity. And clarity, when used correctly, is power. It allows you to move faster, not slower, to decide with confidence instead of hesitation, to focus on what truly matters without being distracted by what once pulled you away. But most people never use this advantage. They carry their past like weight instead of using it as a foundation. They look at what didn't happen and assume it can't happen, instead of realizing they are now more equipped than ever before. There is a shift that can happen here. A shift from looking backward to building forward. From measuring time as something lost to seeing it as something that can still be used with intention. And once that shift happens, everything begins to change. You realize something important. You don't need as much time as you once thought. Because you are no longer guessing. You are applying. You are moving with direction instead of uncertainty. And that changes how quickly your life can begin to take shape. This is not about starting over from nothing. This is about starting from experience, about using everything you've learned finally in a way that aligns with who you are now. Because purpose does not disappear with time. It becomes clearer, stronger, more defined, but only if you choose to reconnect with it. And that choice is where everything begins, not with a dramatic change, but with a simple decision. This is not the end of my growth. This is the moment I finally understand how to direct it. Once that decision is made, something subtle begins to shift. It is not dramatic, not immediate, but it is real. You begin to notice that what once felt final may not have been final at all, that what you accepted as limitation may have been nothing more than a pattern of thought repeated over time. And this is where the true work begins, not in changing your circumstances all at once, but in examining the beliefs that shape them. There is a change that comes to many men, not suddenly, but gradually. It does not appear as failure, nor does it resemble defeat. Instead, it disguises itself as maturity, as acceptance, as a form of wisdom. A man begins to tell himself that he understands how life works, that he has seen enough to know what is possible and what is not, and from that conclusion, he begins to narrow his expectations. This narrowing feels reasonable. It feels grounded. It feels like a natural adjustment to reality. But beneath it lies something far more dangerous. Because it is not reality that has changed, it is belief. And once belief is reduced, action follows. A man no longer reaches as far as he once did. He no longer pushes beyond his current condition. He tells himself that he is simply being practical, that he is no longer chasing unrealistic outcomes. But what he does not realize is that he has begun to withdraw, not physically, but mentally. There is a difference between wisdom and withdrawal. Wisdom refines effort. It directs energy toward what matters and eliminates what does not. Withdrawal, however, reduces effort altogether. It convinces a man that less is enough, that there is no longer a reason to expand, to build, or to strive beyond what already exists. And this is how many lives begin to slow without ever appearing to fail. From the outside, everything looks stable. Responsibilities are handled. Systems are maintained. The individual appears consistent, reliable, even successful. But within, there is little movement forward. There is no sense of expansion. He is no longer building. He is preserving. And while preservation has its place, it cannot replace creation. This condition does not happen once. It is reinforced through repetition. Each time a man chooses what is familiar instead of what is possible, the pattern strengthens. Each time he avoids uncertainty in favor of comfort, the habit deepens. And over time, this becomes his way of life. He no longer questions it. He accepts it. And what is accepted without question becomes fixed. There are many who reach this stage and remain there not because they lack ability, but because they have accepted a reduced vision of what is possible. They call it realism. They believe they are simply seeing life clearly. But in truth, they are seeing it through the lens of repeated limitation. And that is where the shift must happen, because nothing begins to change until belief is examined. You must ask yourself, is what I believe about my future based on truth or on repetition? Have I truly reached my limit, or have I simply stopped expecting more? This question is not comfortable, but it is necessary, because the moment you begin to question what you have accepted, you create space for something new. There are examples of this principle everywhere. Individuals who did not accept that their time had passed, people who chose to act, not because conditions were ideal, but because they refused to accept limitation as final. They did not begin with more time. They began with a different belief. They understood that experience had prepared them, not restricted them, that what they had learned through years of effort, success, and failure had given them something most people do not yet possess: clarity. And clarity changes everything. Because when you are no longer guessing, you move differently. You waste less time. You make decisions with more precision. You focus your energy where it matters most. You stop chasing everything and start choosing deliberately. This is the advantage of experience, but only if it is used correctly. Because experience can become either a foundation or a burden. If you carry it as regret, it slows you down. It reminds you of what did not happen. It reinforces hesitation. It makes you question whether it is worth trying again. But if you use it as instruction, it becomes powerful. It shows you what to avoid. It reveals what does not work. It gives you a clearer path forward. The difference is not in the experience itself. It is in how you interpret it. There is a shift in perspective that must occur. Instead of asking, "Why did this fail?" you begin asking, "What did this teach me that I can now apply?" And in that question, something changes. What once felt like wasted effort becomes preparation. What once felt like loss becomes knowledge. And that knowledge allows you to move forward with greater certainty. There are many who begin with enthusiasm but without understanding. They move quickly, but often in the wrong direction. They spend years discovering what does not work. But you have already done that. You have already paid that cost. And that gives you an advantage if you choose to use it. There are examples throughout history of individuals who achieved their greatest results later in life, not because they suddenly gained ability, but because they applied what they had learned with precision. They no longer acted on assumption. They acted on understanding. Each decision was informed. Each step was directed. And because of that, their progress accelerated, not because time increased, but because waste decreased. And that is the power of experience when it is used correctly. But many never reach this point. They hesitate not because they lack knowledge, but because they misinterpret it. They see evidence of difficulty where there is evidence of instruction. They remember what did not happen and assume it cannot happen. And that assumption becomes a barrier. So the task is clear. You must redefine your past. You must stop seeing it as something that limits you and begin seeing it as something that equips you. Because everything you have experienced contains value, lessons, corrections, insight, and when applied, those become direction. There is also something else that begins to change when you make this shift. Confidence. Not the kind based on emotion or temporary belief, but the kind built on proof. You begin to trust your judgment. You no longer depend entirely on external validation. You listen, you consider, and then you decide based on what you have seen and learned. This creates a different presence. Others begin to notice it. You appear more certain, more grounded, more focused. And this perception changes how people respond to you. Opportunities that once passed unnoticed begin to appear, not because they were not there before, but because you are now prepared to recognize and act on them. There is also a reduction in wasted effort. You no longer pursue everything. You select what aligns. You ignore what does not. And this selectiveness increases efficiency. You achieve more, not by doing more, but by doing what matters. This is the beginning of rebuilding, not through force, not through urgency, but through clarity, direction, and deliberate action. And once this process begins, something important happens. You stop asking whether it is too late and start asking what you will do next. Once you stop asking whether it is too late and begin asking what you will do next, your attention shifts from doubt to direction, and that shift is more powerful than it seems. Because as long as your focus is on time, you remain limited by it. But the moment your focus moves to action, time becomes a tool instead of a barrier. There is something else that must be understood at this stage. Experience alone is not enough. It must be activated. Because many men carry years of knowledge, observation, and understanding, yet do not use it. They recall their past not for instruction, but for regret. They remember what did not happen, what did not succeed, what did not produce the expected result. And from those memories, they form a conclusion that little remains to be done. But this conclusion is not accurate. Experience is not a record of failure. It is a collection of refined understanding. It shows you what does not work, what does not last, and what does not lead to meaningful results. And in doing so, it eliminates uncertainty. It narrows your path not by limiting it, but by clarifying it. If you were to begin again, you would not carry your past as weight. You would use it as direction. You would ask a different question, not why didn't this work, but what does this now allow me to do differently? And in that shift, something powerful happens. Your past stops holding you back and begins pushing you forward. There is also a distinct advantage that comes with time. You have seen patterns. You have observed how things unfold. You are less easily distracted by what once seemed important. You recognize the difference between appearance and reality. And that clarity allows you to make better decisions, faster, more precisely, without unnecessary hesitation. There are individuals who begin early but without understanding. They move quickly, but often in the wrong direction. They spend years discovering what does not work, but you have already done that, which means you do not need to repeat it. You can move with precision. You can bypass what wastes time. You can focus only on what matters, and that changes everything. Because progress is not only about speed, it is about direction. And direction, when clear, reduces the time required to produce results. There is also the question of desire, because no matter how much experience you have, if desire is weak, action will be inconsistent. Over time, desire can fade, not because it disappears, but because it is reduced. Disappointments accumulate. Efforts do not always produce results. And gradually, without realizing it, you begin to lower your ambition. You tell yourself you are being realistic, that you are adjusting your expectations. But what is actually happening is something else. You are weakening the very force that creates movement. Desire is not a passing emotion. It is a sustained direction. It is what compels you to act, even when results are not immediate. And when desire is reduced, action becomes uncertain. If you were to begin again, you would restore this force. Not based on what you attempted before, but based on what you now understand. Because your aim does not need to remain tied to your past identity. You are not required to continue what you once pursued. You are allowed to choose again, based on who you are now, based on what matters now. This is where purpose begins to take shape, not from what you used to want, but from what you now see clearly. And that requires honesty, because it is easier to maintain a smaller aim than to commit to a larger one. It is easier to say this is enough than to ask what is still possible. But if you are going to rebuild, you must define something definite, a clear aim, because without clarity, effort becomes scattered, and scattered effort produces weak results. When your aim is clear, your thoughts organize around it, your actions align with it, your decisions become simpler. You know what to accept, you know what to reject, and this creates efficiency. There are examples of individuals who discovered their purpose later in life. They did not hesitate when they realized their direction had changed. They adjusted. They applied everything they had learned to a new aim. And because of that, they advanced quickly. Not because they had more time, but because they had more clarity. Their energy returned. Their focus sharpened. Their actions became deliberate, and others began to notice. There is something distinct about a person who acts with purpose. They move differently. They speak differently. They appear more certain. And this perception changes how others respond. Opportunities begin to align, not by chance, but by direction. Because when your aim is clear, your actions become consistent. And consistency builds trust. There is also an important truth you must understand. Desire alone is not enough. It must be supported by action. Each step you take reinforces your direction. Each action strengthens your commitment. And over time, your desire becomes more stable, less dependent on mood, less affected by external conditions. You no longer wait to feel motivated. You act, and through action, maintain momentum. There may be resistance in the beginning. Old patterns may return. You may question whether it is worth pursuing something new at this stage. But in those moments, you must rely on reason, not habit, because habit is built from the past, and you are now building something different. With repetition, a new pattern forms. You begin to act more consistently. You begin to think more clearly, and your identity begins to shift. You are no longer someone who reflects without action. You become someone who directs and builds. Others begin to see this. They notice your consistency, your focus, your commitment, and that changes your position because people respond to certainty. They trust those who act with direction, and that trust creates opportunity. There is also the need to protect your aim because your mind will attempt to reduce it. It will suggest that it is too late, that it requires more time than is available, that it is uncertain. These thoughts must be examined, and if they are limiting, they must be rejected because they are not based on your ability. They are based on past repetition. You must hold your aim firmly. Allow it to guide your actions. And over time, it becomes central to your thinking. Everything begins to align with it. There is a gradual strengthening that occurs. Your actions become more natural. Your decisions become more confident. Your progress becomes more consistent. You no longer experience the same internal conflict because your thoughts and actions are aligned. This alignment creates efficiency. You waste less time. You move with intention. And your results begin to reflect that. There are many who wait for ideal conditions before they begin. But those who succeed do something different. They begin where they are, with what they have. And through action, they refine their path. They adjust. They improve. They move forward. To others, this progress may seem unexpected, but in truth, it is the result of applying what was already known. The difference is not in knowledge, it is in use. And once you begin to use what you know, everything changes. You are no longer held back by uncertainty. You are guided by understanding. And that is where rebuilding becomes real, not as an idea, but as a process of directing thought, restoring desire, defining purpose, and taking consistent action. And through that process, something powerful happens. You stop looking at your life as something that has already been decided and begin to see it as something that is still being created. In the end, this was never about age. It was never about how much time has passed or how many opportunities you believe you missed. Those are not the forces that determine your future. What determines your future is what you believe is still possible. Because the moment you decide your best years are behind you, you begin to live as if they are. You act with less intention. You expect less from yourself. You settle not because you must, but because you have accepted a smaller vision of what your life can be. And that acceptance is the real limitation. Not time, not circumstance, not ability, but belief. The truth is, you are not starting from nothing. You are starting from understanding. You have seen what does not work. You have experienced what most people are still trying to figure out. You have paid the cost of trial and error. And that gives you something incredibly valuable, clarity. And clarity changes everything. Because when you are no longer guessing, you move differently. You waste less time. You choose more carefully. You act with intention instead of uncertainty. And that allows progress to happen faster than you expect. But only if you use it. Because experience, if misunderstood, becomes weight. It becomes regret. It becomes hesitation. But when used correctly, it becomes direction. It becomes confidence. It becomes power. There is also something else that must be reclaimed. Desire. Not a temporary feeling, not a passing interest, but a clear, defined direction. A decision about what you will build from this point forward. Because without desire, action weakens, and without action, nothing changes. So you must decide again. Not based on who you were, but based on who you are now. What matters now? What is still possible now? And once that decision is made, everything begins to align. Your thoughts organize. Your actions follow. Your energy returns. You begin to move not with urgency, but with purpose. Not randomly, but deliberately. And in that movement, something powerful happens. You stop seeing your life as something that has already been written, and begin to see it as something that is still being created. This is not about starting over. It is about starting from experience. It is about taking everything you have learned and finally using it in a way that works for you. Because purpose does not disappear with time. It becomes clearer, stronger, more defined, but only if you choose to reconnect with it. So do not look at your past as something that limits you. Look at it as something that prepared you. Do not measure your life by what did not happen. Measure it by what you now understand. And most importantly, do not ask whether it is too late. Ask what you will do next. Because your future is not decided by how much time has passed. It is decided by how you choose to use what remains. And when you begin to use it with clarity, with intention, and with purpose, you will realize something that changes everything. Your best years were never behind you. They were waiting for you to see clearly enough to begin.